What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my final installment on Pink Tourmaline of this really interesting, fascinating, intuitive underground video. And in this final installment, I have to do a slightly different format. We had some technical issues, but I figured out a workaround. It took me a while, but I figured it out, and this is how we're going to do it. So instead of having the titles up top like I normally like to do it, we're going to have the titles appear down here of each subsection, and I have highlighted 9 subsections out of this final section of the video, and we're going to go through it right now. And again, some really fascinating takeaways. Just to start, once again, this data, this information has been extracted from a team of remote viewers called Intuitive Underground. Remote viewers, people who can have out-of-body experiences, astral projections. I know it's not perfect information, okay? There can always be things that are received. And I mean, the proof is that like this has to be true, that there have to be mistakes occasionally, because that's why else would people be doing it and then having sometimes conflicting reports? So there is a possibility of this data information to be corrupted. So we have to take everything with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, I do believe that remote viewing, astral projection, out-of-body experiences, these types of access is our best means of accessing, I think, like real source information, real true knowledge, gnosis, if you will. And that's why I'm so fascinated by teams like this. And I think the benefit of having teams of people do this and assess certain targets together versus one person individually is that one person we can always be susceptible to manipulation, to misinformation, etc. Whereas the teams, if their readings don't converge, then that can show that, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't be looking too deeply into this data. Now, is it likely that everybody's views could be manipulated in the same way? I really don't know. But I feel as though these guys carrying it out as a team with certain safeguards makes me feel more confident in this information. Now, just a quick caveat as we get into this final installment. If you've already stuck around, like, this stuff is mind blowing. This stuff at some point can feel dark, maybe. But again, it's not about that. We're going for truth right now, and we're just trying to explore every avenue and learn and try and process information without judgment. I think that's our best bet in terms of ultimately getting to the answers. But I will say this too. There's positives in here too, and we're ending on a positive note, which I always like to do. And so without further ado, buckle up. Part 4, we got some new massive nuggets of information, some new massive takeaways, big takeaways that we're going to explore in this video. So without further ado, here we go. Now we're starting with part 1, or this first section, talking about the Archons, saying that the Archons are effectively evil, yet us, are from the light. We are the light side. And this is an important thing, man. It just reminds me of Star Wars. Now I'm thinking about it right now. The good side, the dark side, and the light side of the Force. But this is going to be important later on, because they actually talk about, from the data, observing that there is a duality to, and this is going to be probably controversial for some people, but potentially a duality to God, to source energy, that it's half light, half dark. And so anyways, it's pretty interesting, but it kind of makes sense, right? Where does the dark come from otherwise, if not from a potential source? So without further ado, here we go.
What we are here to do is to wake people up to what is going on. There's a lot of distancing language that comes in from just trying to look at things from a scientific or objective standpoint. The Archons aren't just dudes. They're evil. All right. We, the souls, spirits, whatever you want to call us, we are from the world of light. This is not the world of light. And base level, it's not the world of light. That was an experience that we were having. All right. Well, and that would be a long discussion about what the ancients told us about them and where they come. But they don't believe. They're blind. They're not the same as us. They don't have the spark of divinity in them, or it's not the same. It's hidden in someone. They don't believe that there's anything but them. It's unanimous on that. They don't believe there's anything but their base level material reality, right? And that is what the spiritual warfare is, and that's what it always has been. So when you talk about you want to get into the Bible, what do you think that set the prisoners free means? What prisoners? Right? When Jesus was talking to the two Jews and they said, "Look, what are you talking about? We are the seed of Abraham. We have never been slaves. How are you going to set us free?" And he said, it's a spiritual slavery, right? Spiritual is the word that we use now that is to translate a number of ancient words that meant simulation.
I'm going to end it right there. It's pretty wild, right? I didn't know that. I never heard that before, this ancient word, but apparently it translates to simulation. That is pretty wild. Okay, moving on to the next portion. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting excerpt talking about this spiritual warfare and it relating back to this idea of a simulation and being free of the simulation or the simulation prison. Okay, next. This is a fascinating path that they go down, talking about the idea that human nature has been changed. There's a big theme in this section of the video talking about our own accountability and in terms of being a part of this system and us playing along with the system. And when we play into the system by doing certain negative actions to each other, we see this right now with the pharmaceutical. I mean, we probably see it all in all of us. None of us are free from this, but we see it at large scale levels of like the pharmaceutical industries, the food industries, just all of us hurting each other for different motivations or ulterior motives and whatnot. But this is a theme in this section of the video that we need to, that part of the liberation process or the awakening process is to stop participating in this system. But without further ado, let's check out this clip. Our nature has been changed by being in this system. Check this out.
But the problem here, you have to understand, is that human nature has been changed and has been changed to make people do extreme. It's changed to make us evil in our interactions with each other, habitually so, not entirely so, but habitually so. And in certain very specific ways, to give us vices, certain very specific vices. And we are the ones maintaining this prison. We are the ones keeping each other in chains. And that is the problem. No one is guiltless in this scenario because the things that we do the no good, dirty, rotten things that human beings do to each other, one, we are collaborating and creating the suffering that others are feeding off of. Two, we are creating this attachment and these karmic debts with each other that keeps everyone involved in this. All right. We're the prisoners, we're the capos in the camp. We're the prisoners selling each other out every day. And so the spiritual battle, whatever it is out in the universe, okay, it could be very broad, it could be very grand, but our spiritual battle is to overcome these immoral behaviors, these evil habits that keep each other chained in this, at very best, purgatory. At very best, purgatory, and at worst, a form of hell. And if it doesn't happen, it is quite possible that this will go on forever.
Okay. Harsh, strong language there, right there at the end. But I've actually had this idea before too. Look, when we are part of the system, sure, we didn't create the system, we didn't design it, we didn't build it. But when we are complicit in the system, does that make us somewhat culpable? Or maybe it's not even about responsibility. Maybe that makes it easier for us to stay within the system. I mean, well, ultimately, if we're going along with it, we're fortifying the system. We're bolstering that system by complying with that system. When I say system, I mean with the negativity that we're releasing on each other in all sorts of various ways, hurting each other for our personal gains. And this idea that, wait a minute, we need to, regardless of what is, I've talked about this before, like a great example is the laws that allow people to effectively market products or services in an immoral way. But we look at any commercial, you turn on the TV, all commercials are just so full of lies and ridiculous images that are clearly trying to give off a certain message that is not, that does not align with truth. And we just say, well, but this is how it is. We're allowed to do this. So we just do it because legally it's allowed. It's like, well, wait a minute. Let's stop for a moment. Let's not just go up to the legal threshold for no reason. Let's actually just speak the truth, bro. Why couldn't we do something like that? So I think these types of things, where if perhaps we could stray away from these societally accepted practices and check in with our inner gut and follow a higher moral code that's probably ingrained within us in some intrinsic level, this could be a part of maybe changing our human nature back, despite being in difficult circumstances, despite having to fend for ourselves and be a part of this system where we have to hunt and kill and eat and do all these things like that, right? Which probably makes it very difficult for us to walk a straight line. But perhaps on some level, if we push back, this will embolden us and this will strengthen us, and this will not make us such participants in the system, and may make it easier for us to have some freedom or flexibility or some ability to escape. Okay. Well, speaking of all this, the next topic is, once again, we get to this idea of how do we escape base reality. There's two parts to this, okay? So this is the first part. And I really like that in this video, Fringe is hammering this question over and over. So we're going to start with this initial clip, and then we're going to come back to this concept a little bit later.
How does our physical body that is plugged in, possibly just a brain, in a tube, in water, or in whatever that vile liquid is.
And by the way, we talked about base reality in the last video. So for those of you who missed it, what is base reality? Base reality is this idea that we are actually, it's kind of like the movie Avatar, where you're inhabiting a certain body, but then you go into a device and then you project your consciousness into another avatar, into another body in another realm. So the idea and what they've seen in the data from their remote viewing experiences is that there's another base reality that we are actually existing in, actually not just as an energy or an essence, but another physical body, potentially in one of these containers. And then we are then projecting our consciousness, like the movie Avatar, into these bodies, into these avatars, in this copy of or simulation, whatever you want to call it, to experience life here. So that's when they're talking about base reality. So they're not saying just how do we escape this reality. Let's say we leave this reality and then we're still stuck in the base reality. How do we leave that base reality? That's the question that she's asking.
How does that stop? And what happens after that stop? So we pass our karmic thing, or we don't, or we turn away from the light, whatever that is that happens. How does that affect the physical body that's plugged into base reality, keeping us in the simulation?
I would suggest it dies, which in base reality is the equivalent of them losing one power cell in their battery. So the more power cells they lose, the weaker their influence is, or the weaker their ultimate source of power is. And maybe there is a threshold at which we cross where they can no longer power their experiments, or, well, I'm getting far off into speculative territory. Dan has something to add to that.
So basically the idea that I would say that inferred from the data, from some of the conversation we're talking here today, actually, wreck their experiment, choose the death, choose to end the experiment at a mass scale to the point where they can no longer carry on with their experiment. At that point, going through the natural death process at base reality, whether that means moving to a higher density dimension or going back to source, at very worst, it ends the experiment. And
okay, so there it is. Essentially, it's effectively unplugging from the system. It's similar to the Matrix movie, where you unplug and then they're using you to actually power the entire simulation and power themselves as well. So you unplug and you remove pieces of the energy system, and then when it hits, I guess, a critical mass or tipping point, then the entire experiment or the simulation would be shut down. So that's effectively what they're saying. We start to unplug more and more and more. They talk about this idea too in more detail. I didn't include this here, but they talk about this idea more in detail of having, what is it called? The 100th monkey paradigm. I don't exactly remember what they're talking about, what they said specifically to explain this, but it's the idea that if you can hit a critical mass of people unplugging or leaving, then boom, the system will not have enough sustenance, not have enough energy, and will be forced to shut down. So that's the idea there. Okay, moving on to the next clip. We go back to this idea, and this is a really fascinating one to me because this is a big question that I had from the get-go. What the heck are they after? Now, we've talked about these different ideas of Loosh and maybe some other objectives. So they come back to this idea. Of course, Loosh is reiterated the energy source, this essence, but they talk about a couple of other things as well in this clip. So without further ado, here we go.
And what are they after, or did you not determine that yet? You said they were searching for something.
Energy for sure. We know that for sure. The technology, I think today we've sussed out that that's most likely another part of it, is an endless supply of new technology over however amount of time, if time even exists at that level. And they're searching for something else. I'm not sure yet. We're gonna find out.
That's the missing part,
yeah,
right
that's
there.
one of the,
That's what we're missing.
Handful of missing parts.
Okay. So, but they give some insights, right? They don't have all the pieces, and this is a work in progress, right? This is not like we found a book and everything's contained within this book, and there we go. They're researching, they're learning, they're investigating, and they're doing it collaboratively. So we're obviously, it's going to be a work in progress as we continue on. Okay. Now we come back to how do we escape base reality, part 2. This is a longer excerpt, nearly a little bit over 4 minutes. Here we go. Big questions require big answers. Let's go.
Turning away from the light and how, telling them to fuck themselves during this life review. How does that get me out of here? Because I still have a physical body that's plugged into the simulation. This is what I need to know.
So I'm now happy because you dropped the F-bomb in this space, and that's what I needed to make this the darkest space possible. That's
okay. I need to know what this. Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead.
I had it and I lost it.
I'm sorry. That's because I interrupted.
In the data. No, you're fine. In the data, they're searching for particular people who are resisting the system, people who are successfully overcoming the barriers or resistance to giving them what they want. And it seems as if they are plucking these people out and they're not in the next cycle. What they do with them at that point, I don't know, at least according to the data.
It just gets worse.
Yeah.
It does.
So for me, in this point, and I'm going to touch on some of the love and light here a little bit. Again, neophyte, only been looking into this material for about 3 or 4 months. But the idea of 100th monkey syndrome, of trying to get the magic number of people together conscious-wise to raise their consciousness to the idea of a Christ consciousness. Again, Christ, Jesus showing the way, how to teach people, not be a part of the 7 deadly sins, and rendering yourself neutral to the situation as things are occurring to you, being balanced not only in your positivity, but also in your negativity, being at peace with your shadow self, the things that make you angry, anxious, traumatized, emotionally susceptible to giving off this energy to what it is that they're seeking as one of their many components that they're looking for out of the test subjects. If we could manage to get a significant amount of people or witnesses, I am that sort of energy, that maybe perhaps it might make them enforce their hand to end the experiment. And then everyone at that point, don't go to the light, choose the death. Maybe you wake up in a better spot. Maybe you don't. According to the data, none of that, what I've just said, is a part of that. These are all inferences on cultural sources and personal beliefs and opinions. This is not data.
I would actually suggest no. There is data. There is data about what happens if you don't go into the light. It's you. Okay, so let's say I use the language of, it's like in base reality that battery cell dies. Well, that battery cell is captured soul energy, so it then dies
in base reality. Morgan, are we talking about base reality, captured soul energy?
Yes. And I think that what happens, in fact, I don't actually just think this, I'm quite certain based on the data, we have several data points that show us that at that time, one dies in base reality. Well, your soul is then free. Now, at that point, you have kind of two options, except it seems that at such a time as your body dies in base reality and your soul is then free, you can do one of two things. You can choose to reincarnate, I believe, in base reality. The other option is, for lack of a better way to put it, is return to source, return to God, become a part of that initial mind of God or God's consciousness, the primordial thought.
The idea of merging back with source to become a part of the primordial thought, I think Jason Georgiani and I think others as well, they disagree with this idea that you're at some point meant to merge and lose your identity. They believe that your identity stays your identity throughout, and there's no merging process that exists. So I'd be really curious to know, if I do get a chance to talk to these guys, where they saw that or how that looks in the merging process. Do you still retain your identity, or do you lose it and you become, you know what I mean? What does that whole thing look like? It is a scary thought, I think, in some ways, even if that is our ultimate goal. I don't know, to lose yourself, if that is indeed what happens. And maybe that's part of the reason why certain people are resistant to it. But anyways, there you have it. The 100th monkey theory idea that he mentioned. And then ultimately we can potentially be liberated. And then when he talks about reincarnating in base reality, you know, obviously it begs the question, so is base reality substantially a better place to exist? And what they said, which I didn't include these excerpts, but what they said is, yes, base reality is similar to Earth, but not as crowded, not as crazy and wild and difficult. And we don't, and it is more of the love and light community's idea of existence in that realm. I'd be curious to know if there's also things like a food chain and where we have to hunt and kill and things like that, or if that's not part of base reality. I'd be very interested to know if there's fundamental differences like that, but I don't know what is in the data and what is not in terms of the base reality. Okay, now again, we come back to this idea of our human nature has been changed and we need to change it back. We must stop participating in a lot of the system and the systematic negative things that we do to each other. Great message.
So while we can go about and say, you know, we're spiritual people, but as long as we maintain these systems, these structures that continue to create the suffering, then we're feeding the system. We are participating in the experiment. And that doesn't end until we stop participating in the experiment, until we stop participating in the creation of suffering for other people, even if it's not direct. It doesn't have to be direct. It doesn't have to be like setting someone on fire or burning them with a match. It doesn't have to be that way. It's creating the system, creating and maintaining the system that allows them to continue suffering.
Boom. So there it is. That same idea is reiterated. And I think this resonates with me, with a lot of people, probably, in this idea of, okay, well, we're obviously not the ones out there trying to directly cause harm, but this makes you think more about just your role in the system as a cog in the wheel and how we can affect change more directly. It's good to keep this in mind. Makes you feel guilty, obviously, that you can always be doing more, but I think it's a very strong and important message. Again, if you go back to this idea that we need to reach some critical mass of consciousness or a change in consciousness, then we should all be doing our part. Okay, this clip is wild. This is the Star Wars clip. This is the dichotomy of God clip that really had me thinking. So again, I don't know if this is the reality, the nature of reality. I don't know if this is the nature of the primordial God mind, if you will, but I thought it was a fascinating thing. And they said that they saw this information in the data. So take it with a grain of salt, right? Try not to get triggered if you have certain particular religious beliefs. This is just information. It could be right. It could be wrong. So here we go. Let's go with the flow.
God before.
One thing I might add, just kind of contest with that is, who's to say that they don't have a piece of God either?
He's talking about the Archons. They're saying, hey, like we're captured pieces of God. How could they capture us? And that's crazy because that's one of the things in the narrative that Fringe is saying that doesn't make sense. And he says, well, wait a minute. What if the Archons are also fractals or pieces of God as well?
I mean, that's a possibility, but they're definitely missing something that we have. Would you agree with that?
I
I mean,
would
I've
agree. Yeah,
just,
that's a
that's
good
just my
point.
experience
That
being
is a good
around them.
point. That is a very
Yeah.
good point.
Something's
Interesting.
missing. I don't know,
Yeah.
you
Hopefully we
know,
find
they
it.
were likely created by God, but let's just say that they were, you know, their connection was severed or something like that is what I'm thinking.
Well, in the data, they do have this idea that something about them is degrading for what they're doing.
Yeah, and they
I-
need to get our life force energy because they don't have any of their own. I'm just
Yeah.
throwing that out there.
And the inability to create on their own, at least
Yeah.
through the cultural books and knowledge and that sort of stuff. That's not necessarily in the data.
I would add just real briefly, my session work on the ultimate source of reality, and that's where a lot of this, as I keep calling it, you know, the primordial thought or the initial spark of consciousness that from which everything else emerged. The way that I described it in that session was an entity of light that is perfectly balanced. Now, perfectly balanced, if we're talking in terms of good and evil, well, that means it's 50% good, 50% evil. So, in a sense, at least from that perspective, it does actually make a lot of sense to me that, you know, why God would allow things to play out in such a manner, because it's effectively letting little bits of itself down here to experience and to do whatever it does. So it's almost that kind of dichotomy at play.
Oof. That's a tough one. It's just a tough one. But yet, there's logic to it. You know, where does the negative stuff come from? If it doesn't come from the source of everything, it's got to come from somewhere. Then Fringe had another interesting idea that maybe it was, but then it severed its connection, and then it's maybe trying to hold on to existence or whatever the incarnation is that they have right now by draining our energy or the energy of others that are still maybe connected to God. I mean, that could be true as well. It's some piece of that consciousness that has gone rogue. I don't know, but that just blew my mind when he talked about the data of this source of energy or whatever being perfectly balanced. You know, what does that mean? The good side, the bad side, the dark side, the light side, having this dichotomy. It's too much for me to continue to ponder right now because it just came out in this video. I heard it. I had to include it. I don't really know where to go with it. So that's all I'm going to say about that. You guys make your own judgment. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on this one for sure. Okay. Now this next clip, very, very, very important and obviously somewhat obvious if you do buy into the Loosh system and the idea that our emotions or our emotional output is fueling the system. He says, hey, guys, controlling your emotions takes away their energy. And that's something that we should look into, you know, not ignoring your emotions, not being fake, not being phony, but gaining some control over your emotions and probably more specifically your emotional reactions or how you affect other people is going to be important, not only for you and those around you, but ultimately for our perseverance and taking down whatever the system may be.
I found remote viewing to really help me psychologically in learning how to remote view. I was, a chef. I had a big ego. I had a lot of things that were out of control in my life: drugs, alcohol abuse, relationships with people, and those sorts of things. And just being okay as being a tyrant. Like having to go through learning how the subconscious can affect you in your everyday life. It's literally like a trainable dog. You can work through with a therapist, I would suggest, or even by yourself, going through and sitting with things. One concept that's been coming up quite a bit in the last 4 months of my spiritual journey, so to speak, is the idea of healing. You got to go back to the spots that hurt. You got to go back to the things that negatively affect you, understand why they affect you, and put it to bed in some metaphorical way, whether that's with help or through your own machinations. And those will help And at very worst will help identify your trigger points when it comes to emotional triggering, whether that's through a conversation with a loved one or just some complete stranger that just decided to be real nasty to you for no apparent reason, and not allowing yourself. It basically, it helps to stay in more control of your emotions. And for me, given this information that we've been talking about today, it takes energy away from the space sticks. As comical as that sounds, or how Simpsons like that might sound, it really helps.
There it is. Okay. And I think that's a good point. But yeah, coming back to this idea, I think there's a lot of awareness nowadays about the importance of healing trauma. Tony even talked about it. Tony Sayers, when he was on the show yesterday, and how he's done a lot of inner work. And I continue to do that as well. One interesting thing, obviously through conventional means, but I had quite a breakthrough when I did do DMT, which is something I've talked about a couple times on the channel. I haven't really shared it like all over the place, but it was a profound experience. And I let go of a lot of baggage, I guess you could say, based around things that have happened to me. And it just like, I let them go. And it was instant, immediate, or like within a day or two, I guess, of the experience. And it is sustained thus far. So I'd just love to know what their thoughts are on using things like that as a mechanism of a valve release or letting certain things go. And just very curious. But yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. Okay, guys, we are at the tail end. The final message, you know me, I always like to end on a message of positivity. And there are messages of positivity. You know, they call it the doom room, and there is a lot of things that they mention here. If you're new to this, you're like, what is going on? You don't want to believe it. You don't want to believe it. This was my position when I was first learning about this information. You don't want to believe it. And I don't know. We still don't know we're still trying to learn. Okay. I can't say this is 100% true. This is 100% false. We don't know. But I think it's important that we analyze it, we consider it, and we look at where it's coming from. We listen to these guys, and we have to be open-minded and learn, even if the information that we're presented with is unpleasant. That's just facing reality head on, especially if we're trying to help each other. And if there is indeed something that we need to overcome, we got to be grounded in reality, not in fantasy land. So it is what it is. But this stuff, as dark as it may seem, we got lots of messages of positivity, lots of messages of hope that we are not outmatched, outnumbered, if you will. That, in fact, in a lot of ways, we hold the cards. We just have forgotten that we do, due to the memory wipes, due to the manipulation, due to a number of things. So without further ado, we're going to end with a note of positivity on this final message of hope. Let's go.
This is probably the darkest shit that I've ever dealt with in my lifetime. It's put me on a course that I never would have imagined. It's put me through some dark shit for a couple of years. But once you get used to the ideas and the concepts, and you have your own truth about the matter, and you have your own understanding about the matter, it becomes easier. It becomes easier to talk about and reason with, and provides enough understanding about why our world is the way it is, why our world always seems to be at war. There are reasons for these things. And when we understand those, we can understand that we don't need to be afraid of it at all anymore. One day we are all going to go home, and I hope we all work together to get there one day.
There it is. Love that. Love that. And I mean, there's so many important things in that last clip. Number one, and I think this is what I've been searching for so long, is so many of the narratives or the things that we see or hear on TV or from politicians or for potential reasons why this happened or that happened, they just don't add up. After a while, it's just like, why does all these things keep happening? Why are we still at war at this point, and where we're supposedly advanced to this stage of understanding and compassion, but then people are just bickering and fighting over nonsensical things? It just feels like clown world. And then you start to hear these ideas of the larger context. And once again, we're still trying to suss through what's true and what's not. There's still a long journey ahead of us, at least for me. I can say that personally. But the fact that now we have this idea, this peek behind the curtain of what the bigger picture is, it starts to make sense why the world is the way that it is, why we have this seemingly endless level of insanity going on back and forth. It's like, okay, well, there's a potentially another purpose to it, an external rationale that we can't really see or understand. And it's like, okay, well, that must be what's perpetuating it. And I can kind of get my head around this. So it's like, as difficult as this information is to hear, man, it's almost kind of what we've been craving, because we know something's off. You know what I mean? And so there's something special and magical about that. But again, what he says there, I love that last part. We will work together and we will eventually triumph together. And if you think about the eternal nature of existence and spiritual energy, he has to be right. That's mathematically true. If you stretch the timeline to infinity, this will eventually break. It has to. So I love that. I love that. I can't remember what the name is of this guy who threw in that message, but I don't think it's just what they call a hopium. No, I think it's real. I think I feel right in alignment with him. All right, guys, there it is. This has been a massive undertaking to go through this series, but man, has it been fascinating, fun, even have communicated with this whole team actually via email because of this video series. And hopefully we're going to have these guys on very soon on the show, and we're going to get into even more details. It's going to be so incredible. So this has been such a joy. Once again, thank you to Krishna Consciousness Academy for pointing me in the direction of this video. It has just been a treasure trove of information, just so fascinating. I think people have really enjoyed it. A lot of people, I noticed on their YouTube channel when I first did this video, they had like 22 subscribers. Now I think it says 407 right now. They just had a bunch of growth, and I feel happy that I contributed to that, because I do think more people should check this stuff out. But just all around, I think people have been finding it interesting, fascinating, and just like me. So it's this whole journey has been amazing. I'm losing my voice. I got to go to bed. That's all I got for you guys. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. Let me know your thoughts on this 4-part series, please. And I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.